Welcome back to the Outdated Wrestling Hour. We got a special one for you this time, right up my alley. It's a fantastic lady named Joyce Paustian and her brand new book, My Ringside Seats of the AWA. It's got all the stars in photographs. Baron Varashkiki, Vern Gagne, even Lord Alfred Hayes, and the Crusher. If you love the AWA, you'll love this. The way I love soup. And that Bob better get himself in order here. Lentil. He offers me lentil. He knows I like chicken with stars. It's the Outdated Wrestling Hour. But you can have as much soup as you want. Hi, everybody. This is Bob Smith, your old friend from Pro Wrestling Illustrated magazine and all those other London publishing magazines, as well as WCW and other places. And this is the Outdated Wrestling Hour. We're glad you're back. I'm really excited about this one. We're going to do a little housekeeping afterwards with some announcements about the fan club and other things coming up. So we're going to read some names of some new members, so hang tight. But I just met a wonderful lady who wrote a fantastic book, which is mainly a picture book. It's called My Ringside Seats of the AWA, and her name is Joyce Paustian. And I'm telling you, this book, she's selling it herself. It's fantastic. Over 500 photographs of classic AWA action, as well as her personal remembrances of her relationships with some of the AWA wrestlers. Absolutely fantastic fan's eye view of the AWA territory days. This is a great book. I mean, it's not like a literary classic like Brian Solomon's book, but this is loaded with photos, loaded with little tidbits, little trivia mixed in there that you'll see through the photographs. It's great. So enough of my yakking. I want to get on with this interview with a wonderful person, Ms. Joyce Paustian, and her new book, My Ringside Seats of the AWA, which, by the way, has a foreword by Sergeant Slaughter. What are the chances? Well, gang, this is going to be a real treat for me. It's somebody I've never met before, and she has just published a brand new book that's really her story of her life in wrestling, as well as an incredible number of, more than 500 photographs that nobody's ever seen before of the stars and great moments of the AWA. This is a phenomenal book. It's called My Ringside Seats of the AWA, My Photos and Stories from the American Wrestling Association, with a foreword by Sergeant Slaughter. Our guest is Joyce Paustian. Is that right? Am I pronouncing it right?
That's pretty darn close. Paustian.
Okay, very good. And thank you for being here. This is a real privilege to be able to speak to you. I have ordered her book. She didn't send it to me. I ordered it, folks. I wanted to buy this book, and I'm flipping. And I'm not blowing smoke at my listeners. This is one you have got to get because there's nothing else like it out there. It's a fan who became part of the scene. Am I right about that, Joyce?
Yes, I would say so. I started out as a fan, and I wanted to get closer on the inside, and I thought the way to do that was to be a photographer, and I met a lot of great people along the way and met some really great wrestlers along the way, and I think my best trait was that I was loyal and just persistent, and I gained access to a lot of the AWA high schools and arenas, and got to meet some really good people along the way and get some great photos.
You say the phrase good people, and that's the vibe I get from reading what I've been able to read of the book so far, that a lot of these wrestlers were really accommodating and gentlemanly and friendly. And I mean, when you get guys like Bobby Heenan, who's as acerbic as it gets, to treat you nicely, you must be doing a pretty good job out there.
He the person he is on TV is great. Don't get me wrong, and he is a laugh a minute. But down deep, he's a very nice guy, and he has a wife and daughter at home, and he would show me pictures of him, and I think he enjoyed just having a quieter side of a fan, rather than. He really was afraid of strangers, and really, when he wasn't around the other wrestlers, he could be a very quiet and interesting guy to talk to. So,
that's an understatement. Well, and you're interested too in that you did this basically for yourself. You weren't really selling photographs to magazines but you were getting good ringside seats and taking shots in the various arenas, and you went on tour just like the wrestlers did. Really interesting.
Yeah, I had always kind of hoped that maybe I would get more involved in the photography, but I found out it's a lot of work, and especially back in the film days when you had, and I didn't have the best equipment of all. I had paid for my equipment myself, and I was still learning how to use it, and learning where to be and where to stand. And I, of course, didn't have access to the dressing room shots like some of the male photographers. And there were a lot of the cities I was already in didn't need an additional photographer at ringside. So I had to kind of find my own niche to get some photos. And I didn't really want to photograph every single match that was out there. So sometimes I wanted to socialize with some of the people that were there, so my heart wasn't totally in the photography, but I definitely wanted to be at the matches and have the opportunity to travel. So yeah, that was all on my own dime, and I was lucky enough to have a job that allowed me to do that on the weekends. So.
Well, like I say, I've been thumbing through the book and going through it for the last couple of nights when I got it in the mail, and there's some great shots here. I mean, you have virtually every star and every preliminary wrestler from the glory days of the AWA. You've got Andre the Giant, you've got Ox Baker, Jesse the Body, on and on it goes. I can't think of anybody who was a star in the AWA you don't have, including Hulk Hogan. I mean, you've got them all in this book.
Yeah, we really could tell when Hulk Hogan came in '81 that he was really going to be something. And initially he was a heel in the AWA, or brought in as a heel, and with Johnny Valiant, and very quickly the fans could sense that he was something special, and became a really huge star. And then he went away to do the Rocky III movie, and when he came back, I couldn't believe how famous he was. And I mentioned in the book about that. It was a bigger crowd than I had ever seen at the arena. So, and I had the opportunity to talk to him a couple of times at the airport, and that was way before things got so huge nationwide. But he was a nice guy at the time, and I wish now, knowing what I know now, that I had taken a lot more photos of him or gotten a lot more autographs. But.
You never know how these things are going to shake down. I mean, it's like when he left the AWA, it was very abrupt, according to the historians, who were there. So, and it really put Vern Gagne in a bind for his Christmas shows that were coming up that year. And it was tough. It was tough to lose a talent like that because he, like you say, he was drawing like gangbusters.
Yeah. And obviously people second guess all those decisions over and over again. But, us longtime fans could tell where it was headed and that it was going to happen regardless of what, in my opinion, regardless of what anybody within the promotion would have done. It was going to happen, and they were going to lose out. They just weren't going to compete. And their philosophy of wrestling was a lot different than the big cable network philosophies of wrestling, and where it was headed with the music and the lights and the pyrotechnics and all that. That wasn't the AWA style. It was more amateur wrestling and with an enhancement. So it was just the sign of the times, and they had a lot of great talent to draw from. But I think it's kind of neat to see what some of those talents looked like in the territory days before it got so big. So
Exactly.
that
Yeah.
was what I
And,
thought people might be interested in.
and I like the way you arranged the book. Speaking of the territories, in other words, it was the AWA, but you put it in different sections, like for Peoria and Minneapolis and Milwaukee, Chicago, even the spot shows.
Huh.
You really take care in showing off the arenas as well as the talent, which was kind of a nice touch.
Yeah, I thought people would because there's plenty of pictures out there of most of the big stars of the AWA. You can go to any magazine or any other photographer and see just pictures of the stars. So it had to be something unique, and that's why I thought if I can also showcase the crowds and the arenas to show that it really was a very popular promotion early on in
Oh,
the
sure it
70s and
was.
early
Yeah.
80s. People have a really strong sense of nostalgia right now for the good old days of the AWA, and they want to remember the childhood heroes that they grew up with. And so if they can see the arena and say, I went to wrestling there, that's how I remember watching wrestling, I thought I could grab onto that. And for me, it was a necessity to go to the different places because it wasn't so much that I loved traveling. It was just that wrestling stopped at each of these cities that I was used to going to. It stopped having it in my hometown. So just because it was not drawing well in my hometown, so I had to go somewhere else about 100 miles away to go to regular wrestling, and then that town stopped, and so I had to I had to keep going further and further to satisfy my wrestling addiction. If you will.
That's how it got to be after a while. But you say, well, yeah, you can see the AWA photos anyway. Yours are different. You have a lot of casual photos here of them kind of letting their guards down a little bit in some of the photos. It all has a very happy tone to it, other than the action shots, of course, because you describe how you not only photographed the wrestlers, you also drove them around quite a bit, didn't you?
Yes, I did, and that didn't start out at the beginning, but as time went on, some of the promoters just got too busy to do it, and of course the heels and the faces couldn't ride together at that time. It was strictly kayfabe at
Right.
that time, so they needed a few more cars and drivers. So some of the promoters would ask us, "Do you mind? I got to get home. Do you mind taking them to the airport?" And of course, was jumping at the chance. So most of them, I was lucky to get involved with driving Nick Bockwinkel and Bobby. They were very, very much old hands and gentlemen about knew how to treat people and didn't take advantage of anybody. There were some young. I won't lie that there were some younger ones um, that I said I'm never driving him again.
Oh, okay.
So
Yes,
there
enough
were
said. Okay. Yeah.
yeah, there were times when I didn't, but that was not why I was there. So I wanted to just get to know him better, but I trusted Nick, and I had a few that I trusted. And yeah, I'll drive you, and usually I had somebody with me, so it was safe. So, and I'm not sure
That's
my mom saw it that way, but
No, you got to that before I had a chance to ask it, because it's like I've hung out with my share wrestlers too, and after they leave the arena, they tend to change a little bit. Some of them party quite hard, some don't. Some are teetotalers. Wrestlers were like anybody else; you'd get all kinds. So you seem to have been protected by the wrestlers you knew, which was really a nice thing when I read that.
yeah, and especially I would say Nick Bockwinkel. He was. At least in my experience, he was a total gentleman at all time. He'd take a drink once in a while, but not in the car, and not,
Mhm.
and he was not into drugs. And I think probably that was because his brother died of an overdose. I don't know if you
Had no
know that,
idea.
but yeah, his younger brother, Dennis, Dennis, he wrestled as Dennis O'Brien. Um,
Hmm. Oh, I
and,
had no idea.
yeah,
So,
so I
so
don't.
that'll
Nick probably had that in his character anyway, but I think that would probably solidify it. But I tried to stay away from any that were really strong into drugs or strong into alcohol, and I think sometimes because of the routine of the AWA, they weren't wrestling every single night, and they weren't getting hurt as often. The moves weren't as dangerous as they became later in some of the bigger promotions. And you had to be there every night, and it was the strain of travel. So I think a lot of the drug and pain pill culture, and also the steroid culture, came along more in the later 80s when I was no longer driving them. So
Right.
I think I luckily missed out on some of the worst behavior, if you will. And like I said, there were some who wanted to smoke and drink along the way, and I just Nick steered me away from those, and I just said no thanks. Somebody else can do it. And there were always plenty of people willing to party with them and drive them. So
Nick Bockwinkel on television, especially when he turned face late in his career, always came across as like the perfect gentleman. And then when I met him, I found out he was the perfect gentleman. It wasn't an act. He was who he portrayed himself to be on television, even though, he's working in, wrestling parlance, when he's talking in an interview. But you could just tell there's something different about him. He really was the thinking man's wrestling champion. He was different. He was more cerebral than other wrestlers were. Does that make any sense to you?
Yes, absolutely. And that's what attracted me to him as a fan initially, because I thought he's different than all the other wrestlers. I liked the rough and tough wrestlers like Mad Dog Vachon and the Crusher, but there was something special about Nick in that I thought, wow, that's a champion, and he carries himself like a champion. And you could tell he was gonna go places. Even when he already had the tag team champion, and he would make mention in his interviews sometimes, like, to Vern Gagne, I will get you. I'm going to take your title someday, and you really believe that yes, he's going to be the champion someday. And
well, late in his career, right before he retired, I think he was around 55. I could be wrong. Right around 55.
Yeah, I believe so.
Right before that period, he had some of the greatest matches he ever had against Kurt Hennig.
Right, an hour. I mean, yeah.
That's impossible, but he did it, and he looked as good then as he did 20 years earlier. An amazing athlete, just one of the best of all time.
Yeah, and he was professional inside and out of the ring, and I can't say enough good things about him. And I was very lucky to have had him take me under his wing, so to speak, and kind of protect me from some of the more undesirable elements of the business.
Right. But it sounds like overall, just from the tone of your book, you had a blast, didn't you?
I did. I was loving it. It was great. I counted the days until the next wrestling card, and I couldn't wait till, and I'd make notes, and I'd figure out, who do I need pictures of? Who do I need autographs of? I mean, this was when I was still a teenager, but as I got older, then it was kind of like, the excitement was still the same. I still couldn't wait to go to wrestling in Rockford and see my friends who were the wrestlers.
Well, you kind of had a coterie of friends too, just civilian friends. Friends who also were photographers and things like that.
Other photographers, other fans. I definitely made a lot of friends, and there were a lot of them that they went to different towns as well. So I would see some of the same people no matter what town I was in. And that was kind of fun. It was a little bit just made me feel good that I could see these friends from time to time, and they became lifelong friends. That you don't see that much. I mean, I go back to some of my high school reunions. We barely have anything in common, but if I go back to my wrestling friends, we can still talk like it was yesterday.
Yeah. So. I know how you feel. I have lost some friends that I used to go to the matches with when I was, 17 to 25, and I miss them. And the fact that you can see anybody that you knew from the time you were that age, that's magic. That's gold. You know, as we age, anytime you can have lifelong friends, it's a big deal, you know, so that's really great.
Yeah. And nowadays, I still make new friends at the Tragos Fest Museum and get to meet new people. And that's important, but there's something special about being able to talk to somebody who was actually there at the time, and
right.
they're fewer and far between because we're all getting older, and not a lot of them don't travel as much anymore, like you mentioned. But Facebook is a wonderful thing, so we can still kind of keep in touch. I just recently reconnected with Mike Gretschner, who I mentioned in my book as being a mentor to me. We hadn't talked for close to 10 years, and
wow.
just recently reconnected, and he's doing well, and we're going to get together in September. So I'm
that's
excited
great
about that. So.
But I just want to interject, and I don't know if I mentioned this earlier. You are the official photographer for the Traeger's Stats Hall of Fame, and which is kind of cool.
By default, yeah, I was there at the first one, and there was media there because it was a grand opening of a museum in Newton, and but they didn't have anybody for their own newsletter to take some shots. So they said, while you're there, and they kind of knew that I had taken pictures for the AWA and down in St. Louis a little bit. And they said, would you mind taking some pictures? And it was Vern Gagne, that first class of inductees, and Luthez, of course. And would you mind taking some pictures? I'd be happy to, So they weren't the best because it was very crowded, very small, but it's the only ones that have survived from that first event. And then after about 4 of these, they said, you've been to every one of these. Would you like to be our official photographer? Sure, that's great. And so because I would go anyway, I would be there anyway. It's not like they had to. There's no pay involved, just like the wrestling magazines.
Yeah, but most of these organizations are a labor of love, just like this podcast.
Absolutely.
I'm not doing this for $1 million, but
No.
I do this podcast. If you notice, it's called the Outdated Wrestling Hour, and the idea is to bring on people like you so we can look back at the things that we enjoyed years ago, and hopefully somebody even this younger will hear us talking. And go, man, that's great. That was kind of cool. So it's both educational and cathartic for somebody like me, because it's like I want to relive those old days too. I really do.
Yeah, I mean, the good thing is they give me special access to taking the pictures, and that I get to take, just like at CAC, we had 3 official photographers for a while while I was doing it, and then they would say, let the official photographers take the pictures first, then everybody can come up and take their pictures, and that way, we didn't have a lot of heads turning the wrong way or flashes going off in others' photos, and so it gives you access for better photos. And I'm sure you realize that trying to get about 4 or 5 wrestlers in a shot to look the same way and smile at the same time and not get somebody closing their eyes, it's like herding cats, because they do their own thing, and they want, you want to say, hey, Bob, over here, and there is like, waving to their friends, and then they wonder why you can't get a good picture. But there's an art to even taking award photos.
There really is. I worked with Bill Apter, who's famous for his photography, and his way to cut the ice was tell jokes.
Yeah.
Try to be as funny as he could and goof off and make it like fun. And chances are you can get an impromptu picture of a wrestler just smiling or laughing, and you didn't think you would get anything like that. And it helps, helps build a photo library when you have that ability to connect with the wrestler that you're photographing. Not just please look here, 1, 2, 3, one of those.
No, they don't ever listen to those directions.
So which leads us to another interesting question. How the heck wrestling has always been, or at least in our day, a closed shop. I mean, it was a society full of secrets, and they didn't want the fans to know a whole lot about what was going on behind the scenes, but you somehow managed to ingratiate yourself in that world. What was your key to being able to do that? I mean, to be able to get access to the wrestlers as well as you did.
I think it was just being around so long and gaining their trust, and that I was still there, and they knew that if they mentioned anything that I hadn't said anything. And I think Sergeant Slaughter alludes to it a little bit in his foreword, in that he says he knew that I knew who he was when he first came as the masked super destroyer. He knew I knew who he was, but I didn't say it. I didn't say, "Hey, Bob, I know you're Bob Remus. I know you're Bob Slaughter. Is it okay if I call you Bob?" I didn't do that. I just said, and they wanted to have him called Matthew around the fans, because that was his code name, So I played the game. I said I kayfabed them as much as they kayfabed me. So I think just that I was willing to acknowledge that there was a need to keep it quiet amongst, or the illusion is ruined for the other fans. And I still feel that way a lot of times. I'm old school enough that I kind of miss the days where you suspended your disbelief and believe that these guys are really out there to get each other. And when they opened up the box and said, hey folks, it's all scripted, it's all fake, it's all just entertainment, it's these guys are just playing an acting role, kind of ruined it for me. It's you don't want to know how the magician's tricks are doing.
I know exactly how you feel, but I will say this: as recently as 1991, I was in Memphis, and I walked into I was looking for the men's room, and I walked into a room where promoter Jerry Jarrett and booker Eric Embry and Vice President Eddie Marlin, whatever his role was, were going over the booking for a TV show that I was about to appear on. And I walked in, and they looked at me like they saw a Martian. They knew why I was there, and they knew who I was. Okay, but they still didn't want to speak out loud about what they were going to do on the program. That's how strong the kayfabe was back then, even into the 90s.
Yeah,
they didn't.
It was like
even though they just, nobody can hear this. I could tell from the look on their faces. So I got out of that men's room quick and got out of there, because I realized what was going on, and they were just huddling, discussing something important that was going to end up on the air. Well, but even though they know I was there to appear on the show, and I knew kind of what was going on, they didn't want to say it in front of me.
Sure,
that is strong kayfabe right there.
And I knew not to ask anything about the matches or let on that I knew that that anything was prearranged or expected to happen. We just talked about other things on the trip, and so I think that was and the times when I would have to drive somebody that wasn't supposed to be in the car together, they just treated it as like, we're going to have to go make another stop to pick somebody up. Oh, okay. It's like, why are we doing that? But then it was because they couldn't be seen together, and we had to be very careful not to let any fans see that happen. And I couldn't talk about it. That's what the great thing about talking about this 35 years later is, now I can talk about it.
Right. One of the cities you mentioned is Peoria. We had a guest on, Mike Morris, who used to write for the newspaper in Peoria.
Oh, I'll be darned.
And he told the story about his first cards that he did. And he was still in high school, but he got a job with the paper doing the wrestling results in that same high school, I guess it was, right?
Richwoods High School, yeah.
Yeah. What was that place like? Was it big enough? Because that seems like a small sounding venue for wrestling, but apparently it held about 1,500 people or so.
I would say even more than that. Probably to 2,500, I would say.
Wow. Okay.
It was all full, because they had double bleachers all the way up, and an upper level and a lower level, and then ringside on all four sides. So for a town that was at the time about 120,000 people, that was considered a good crowd. So they would get the weeknights. If they could get 2,500 people showing up on a weeknight, they could save the bigger towns like Minneapolis and Milwaukee for the weekends, where they'd get, at that time, 6,000 and 7,000 was a great crowd for even those arenas. So,
oh yeah, but you and I seem to have a similar time frame for when we started getting into wrestling. I think I was used to going to my local arenas, and they'd be pretty full most of the time. The places I went to in upstate New York, where I'm from, was it similar when you started to really get serious about the AWA and go from place to place? The arenas were pretty packed, weren't they?
Yes, they absolutely were. Yeah, it was. That was why I had trouble getting ringside seats, because they were all sold out right away. They'd start selling tickets for the next event that night. Get your tickets. And there were a couple times when it was either a battle royal or cage match or something. Say it's sold out. Or it's standing room only. And there were people waiting outside and couldn't get in. Yeah. So
yeah. See, that's what people have. That's what people get wrong about old school wrestling. Everybody thinks Vince McMahon invented the big crowds. That's not true.
Yeah,
that's not true. There's always a demand to see pro wrestling. The arenas may be a little smaller, but they'd fill them up.
Absolutely.
And they were running Madison Square Garden long before Vince bought the company from his father. So there's nothing new under the sun there, really. Jim Cornette talks about it all the time, that he believes that they actually drew more fans as a sport overall in his era than they do now. And I think that's true.
Yeah, because I think it was more of an event to have a packed, tight arena like that of 2,500, 3,000 people in every seat, rather than a big 15,000 arena where you're only selling the bottom half, or you're only selling parts of it, and you got it curtained off in the rest because you don't want to show that half. So I'd much rather go to the smaller arena and have it be packed like that.
Better view too, selfishly, right? It's just better to see.
Yeah, have the background. But I thought, like anybody, you think those days are never going to end, and they do. Everything runs its course. So people were ready for something different.
But the way sports generally are presented when you go to see them, like I'm a New York Mets fan, and I go to Citi Field here in New York, and the arena looks like you're stuck inside a PlayStation 5 video game. Lights swirling around, loud music. Right. I mean, fireworks and smoke pots when the players run out of the dugout. I mean, everything is getting big.
Every sport has to do that now.
Yeah, the NFL does it too. The NBA,
hockey, you name it.
And your ears are splitting, and your mind is getting numb. And I'm like, isn't baseball supposed to be pastoral? It's like, but wrestling. I remember going to my favorite armory in Albany, and it was just one huge cleat light over the ring, and that was the show. Yeah, and that's all they needed.
Well, we had 4 and 5 matches in a show, and that was enough,
Right, yeah.
Each one built on the other, and the main event, almost always went 45 minutes to an hour, whether it was all wrestling or not. And a lot of it was, if it was not a really skilled wrestler, you'd have a lot of outside the ring stuff, but the time limit of it would always go an hour. So you still were getting your money's worth with only 4 or 5 matches, but it built on the tension would build getting up to the main event, rather than having 10, 11 matches, and each one only goes 5 minutes or so. And the thing that I found really unusual was when WWE started putting the main event in the middle of the card. And, and I think sometimes they did that for TV, and sometimes they did it so that the wrestlers could get out of the building and without the fans being around. But it was unusual for the fan who's actually there to see what. Well, wait a minute. Didn't I just see the best thing? Now we got to see other matches?
You know, that's funny. You mentioned that because that was kind of what the old WWF did, even in the 70s at Madison Square Garden.
Really?
A lot of times the
I
main
didn't
event would be in the
realize.
center of the show.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, yeah. People think that they did that, when the TV era got big, but they traditionally did that. It wasn't
Huh.
the last match. And I think part of that reason is they had a curfew there.
Oh yeah.
So if they saved it for the final match, they could get cut off. They can't, because it was highly controlled by the State Athletic Commission here in New York.
Yeah.
So
Well,
I do believe
Chicago
that they
had
put
that
it on
too.
earlier. They put it on early to avoid that entire problem from
I
happening.
see. I see. I hadn't thought of that part of it.
Because
But
a lot of
Chicago
MSG,
had that they couldn't sell alcohol after a certain time on
every state has their thing,
yeah,
right? And
right.
it's the thing too. You would go to a Madison Square Garden card, and people wouldn't even be disappointed when it's the final match of the night. The bell would go off, and they go, "Sorry, it's curfew. It's a draw." And people
Oh wow.
knew that going in. They didn't get upset. So I
That's
guess
amazing.
that's the state by state thing. I guess it's
And
how
I
that
guess
works
it was
sometimes.
just unusual to me that because I was used to you had the opening event, the added attraction, or the second match, added attraction, and then your main event or
Oh,
semi-main
that's true.
event, main
Yeah.
event. That was how the AWA ones were structured. And
Hmm.
when I started going to any other league, I was kind of taken aback by that, and I guess I mistakenly assumed that was something new. But yeah,
No,
it's
yeah,
a
I
good
guess
point.
that is a state by state thing. Some states don't even have state athletic commissions anymore, So,
Right,
but
right.
New York was originally controlled, believe it or not, by the Boxing and Wrestling Commission, and I believe they still are.
Yeah.
I think there's still a
Well,
body that
Illinois had
controls.
that too, and so that was one of the reasons they like to run shows in Iowa because they didn't have the commission.
There you
So
go.
that we were right on the borderline between Iowa and Illinois. They would, if they could, they'd run them in Iowa, so they didn't have to be under state athletic rules.
A little easier to do.
Yeah, yeah.
Speaking of the old times, I had a show couple shows ago. I did a show about the change in wrestling violence between the days when you and I were kids to today. My question for you is this: as a fan, when you had a big, bloody, violent main event or a cage match or some sort of a happenstance where things got really violent, how did you feel about it watching it? Was it off-putting to you? Was it scary? How did you feel?
My first real experience with blood would be I saw the Mad Dog Vachon Crusher match on TV
Hmm.
back in I want to January 1970. I want to say
Oh, is that the one where he got the artery
where
cut?
he accidentally cut his artery
Hmm.
and it was squirting out. I was like I think I was 12 or 13 years old at that time when I had been watching wrestling for a while, but I'd never seen anybody bleed like that. And they were, you could tell the announcers were really concerned about it, and it was uh, like an excitement that wasn't like trying to sell it. It was a genuine concern for the
Yeah, the
wrestlers.
announcer is screaming, "Put some
Yeah,
pressure on it. He's got an
yeah,
artery cut."
get somebody in there,
S-
get somebody in there, stop
So
them.
I
So
believe
that
that
was my
they.
first experience, and I remember running out to my mom and said, "Mom, I'm afraid that Dog Bashan is going to die. Well, he's bleeding, he's bleeding." And my mom, she knew it was wrestling, and she said, "That's nice, dear. He'll be fine."
Oh my gosh! No, the reason I'm laughing is I did the same thing when I was a little kid. I went into the kitchen and told my mom, "Mom, the wrestler's bleeding." I was a little guy, and my mom said, "Yeah, it's wrestling." I went, "What? Why did she
And like,
react
why
like
is
that?"
I couldn't
Yeah,
figure
yeah,
out
yeah.
why is nobody concerned. So that was my first real experience with blood. Um, I hadn't seen a bloody match yet at the arenas. They'd probably had them, in cage matches, but not at the ones I had been able to attend. So when I started to see them, um, I wasn't. I was kind of clued in that it would be controlled, and it was mostly just dripping down their face, and it was not used uh, just so that it would be just anytime. It was used when it made sense, like at a cage. a cage match, or that
Yeah.
they've really been thrown into a turnbuckle or under the ring, and it was the more violent wrestlers typically.
Right.
So while I don't really like it a lot, I understood it, and I used sparingly. It draws the fans. I know, especially in
yes.
like Chicago or New York. I guess
think,
for a while they didn't allow it in New York.
I don't know. It's news
I
to
think
me.
at one time that if they
Going way back,
they would exit out or so.
Oh yeah, visually on TV. Yeah, Fred Blassie, wrestlers like that. Yeah,
but in Chicago, I mean, they would chant, "We want blood, we want blood."
Really?
Most of the times the wrestlers would accommodate, but in the smaller towns where I was, they generally didn't bleed every night. But
no.
Then I started watching Ric Flair later on, and of course he would bleed almost every night there for a while.
Speaking of blood, first of all, I always thought the AWA used it judiciously. They didn't overdo. It wasn't crazy. There was a reason for it. Somebody got hurt or missed something, and he'd have a cut. It made sense in the AWA. It wasn't like gory and overdone.
Yeah.
But today's wrestling, they went through a period of kind of not having any blood shown on television anymore. And now, if you watch the federation called AEW, it is a blood circus again.
Yeah.
I am shocked. I'm shocked. Mainly for health reasons, the commingling of blood and all that stuff is not healthy.
When the HIV thing came along in the 80s, I thought that's it. That's going to be the end of ever seeing blood in wrestling, because they did the same thing in basketball. They any blood comes on the court, you got to get that all cleaned up before we can go on. So the fact that it's still happening it's just amazing. I don't know how they're willing to take those risks, but they do. And I guess I know I'm in the minority in that I enjoyed the actual rest holds, if you will, and that building on amateur skills. And you don't see those holds anymore. All you see are the high spots and the high flying and the tables, the chairs, the ladders, the thumbtacks. To me, that's just insane.
I don't even like the term rest holds. That's bogus. It's called wrestling.
Yeah. I agree.
A chin lock while holding your opponent prone on the mat isn't a rest hold. It's wrestling.
That's part of amateur
or an arm bar, or half Nelson. That's wrestling. It's not a rest hold, please. We're re-educated.
The crowd would yell at them, boring. So some of it is the attention span of the fan anymore, and trying to accommodate what do fans want, and they got to have action every single second.
Well, Craig Peters and I were talking about this back in the day. I hate to sound like an old guy, but I am an old guy.
You sound so old, don't you?
But back in the day, the fans would go. Their impression of a good match was one that satisfied them when their favorite wrestler would get revenge on a villain or a rule breaker or something like that, or a good scientific match, or a tag team match, or a championship changed. That's how people looked at matches when you and I would go. Now they're counting the high spots and the amount of daring do that it takes to jump off, the side of an arena down 20 feet onto the floor and all this other stuff. So the way that the kids are looking at wrestling now is entirely different than when you and I were kids.
Yeah,
it's changed to that, and they want creativity in the storylines and on and on and on. It's entirely different. And you know what? I can't blame the youth for looking at it that way, because that's all they've seen.
Mm-hmm.
They haven't seen the stuff that you and I looked at or went to. So, I'm coming to grips with that now. I can't blame them because they only know what they see and what they've been taught.
And I have to say that I was not a big fan of good guy versus good guy in a scientific match. A little of that goes a long way. So, as a pro fan, I wanted to see the heels and the favorites going against each other, and see the buildup of the heel got took advantage of the hero, and you build up another match, and then maybe they get more revenge, or that maybe they don't, and then you finally say, I got to have a cage match, or I want a
Right.
saloon match where he can't get away from the ring. I I liked that stuff. I liked the buildup of the same match
Yeah. Well,
and continued feud, and that was what was missing for me when with some of the WWE and NWA going nationwide. You didn't see the same feud in the same town by the time they returned 6 months later. It was
mhm.
You had to follow it on TV, and you didn't see the feud play out in your hometown arena.
I was talking to Craig Peters, another editor who was on the show recently from my magazine days, and I think one of the big changes in wrestling was the regularly scheduled card.
Mm-hmm.
Monthly at Madison Square Garden, probably monthly in Minneapolis, or even every 3 weeks. And they would return to the same cities on a regular basis.
Right.
When things blew up, they stopped doing that.
Yeah, and to me, it just made more sense that even if they were going to be a nationwide company, that they would break it down into smaller segments. So you have an A company and a B company and a C company that are in various territories of the U.S. still, and they control it all, but just still don't try to kill your wrestlers by sending them across the U.S. and they're traveling, 7 days a week, sometimes 2 days on the same day.
Well, I think, like you, I think in terms of the wrestler's health, I mean, it's like, it's that kind of fatigue that led to drug use or reliance on painkillers or things like that, and that's a dangerous way to go. And I think I hope they learned from that at least.
I hope
I think
so,
they have. I
because
think they have.
when you look at CAC and the people that were showing up for a while, it was the longer term athletes who were showing up, and they may have been banged and bruised up a bit, but they were still able to come and be there. Whereas a lot of your '80s athletes, had already passed away.
Which is just such a shame, isn't it? It's
We
terrible.
lost so many during that era.
We really did.
Just really a real shame.
If
And
you and I
you
sat down and
can
tried to count them, we couldn't do it in time to end the show, and that's the shame of it.
you can blame so many factors,
Mm-hmm.
but
But
anyway, I hope they learn.
something that's happy and not sad is your book.
Well,
And I'm
thank
gonna
you.
I'm gonna hype this like crazy because, folks, I am telling you, if you have any interest in the AWA, Vern Gagne, Greg Gagne, Jim Brunzell, go down the list. Mad Dog Vachon, Butcher Vachon. If you can name them, they're probably in this book. It is a fantastic piece of work. This young lady definitely underrates her photography, which is spectacular. There's tremendous shots of I guess candid photography rather than just action, but the action stuff is great too. You got to get this book. This is going to be one of the books of the year for me. I told Brian Solomon, who's the author who wrote the book about the Sheik,
Yes.
that I waited my whole life to read that book. This one too. I'm telling you, this is quite a piece of work. I'm not blowing smoke at you fans. This is a must read. So why don't you tell the folks how to get it?
I'm handling the distribution all by myself. Wiser or not, I chose to. So I've had at some of the events around the Midwest, like at Waterloo, I had a table where they could buy it directly. But I have them here at my house, and if they just either send me a Facebook friend request, they can send me a DM on that under Joyce Paustian, and my email is joyce.paustian@gmail.com. And then I take the payment through PayPal and turn around and get it out to you within a few days. And we're very careful about shipping them carefully so that they arrive undamaged. And
I can vouch for that. I can vouch
hopefully,
for it. Yeah, it was beautifully packaged. It had a
thank
little
you.
protective paper around it inside the bubble wrap. It was fantastic. It was
Yeah.
great.
So we just almost everybody has PayPal access nowadays. So and if they didn't get that written down, just have them send me an email to joyce.paustian@gmail.com, and I get back to them very quickly. And I'm also on Facebook and will answer DMs through that. And I've so far I've sold over 100 books.
Oh, that's great.
So it's going very
and
well.
This has been out as we
It's
take
only
this
been
less
out
than
2
10
weeks.
days, right?
Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. Good for you.
So
Good for you.
it's there's a hunger out there for the nostalgia, I think. So
I hope you have to do 5 print reprints. I'm telling you, this is a fantastic book, guys. I cannot. It's not just black and white photography. There's color here at the end of the book. There's all kinds of information, insider stuff about the AWA. I mean, Joyce.
Well, it's not your typical AWA book.
No, it's not.
Where you analyze what went wrong and why did the AWA fail. I mean, that's been done to death. So
right.
I figured people should see the happier times of the AWA and see all the wrestlers that really went through the AWA and realize how lucky we were to have had so many great talents over the years.
Well, just thumbing through this, I can tell the fans that are listening, there's some trivia in here through the photos that I'm sure there are things that they did not know. I don't want to give it away here, but you'll see some wrestlers who became famous when they were referees. And who knew they were referees? I didn't. You know what I'm saying? So there's all this kind of stuff throughout this book that you're going to keep this by your bed table and look at it all the time because it's a fun, breezy read, and the photos are just great. Joyce, I don't know what to tell you other than fantastic work.
That's high praise, and I just really hope. I wanted to share the photos. Finally, share the photos that I took, and share some of the stories that I knew before I get too old to remember them. And it seems like there's a lot of people that had a lot of those same memories. And every time I've talked to somebody, they oh yeah, I remember that guy. I remember this guy. Oh yeah, I remember that arena. That was a lot of fun. Mm-hmm. And it's always a happy thought when they remember it. So maybe enough time has passed that they remember it fondly now.
I think you're right about that. I mean, you can look at the podcast world. I'm one of about 800 nostalgia podcasts. I mean, and I'm not putting anybody down for it. I'm just saying people are starting to look back because I think for 2 reasons. Number one, we're getting older.
Right.
We miss things. And other than that, it's also a situation where I think a lot of the older friends are kind of disaffected by the current product and want to kind of look back at the times when they enjoyed it more.
It's human nature to look back and think that what you had growing up was always better. So change is harder for all of us as we get older, and you start thinking about if I had grown up in this era, maybe I would be thinking that. I find it funny when people say, "Oh, I miss the Attitude Era. That was so fun. That was what I grew up watching, and now it's so different." And I'm like, what are you talking about? I hated the Attitude Era. So anyway, everybody's different, and yes. I think everybody likes the wrestling they grew up watching, and so I'm glad there's still fans out there that like the AWA.
I'm not going to ask your age, but all I know is this: I used to dial a telephone. Yeah. I used to get up and walk across the room to change the channel on the television. Okay.
Right.
Everything in my electronics in my house had a cord on it. Right.
Same generation.
All right. Well, yeah. So when you try to explain this to some of the kids or even 20, 25-year-olds, they look at you like you have 3 heads. It's like, what are you talking about? I said, no, it really was that way. We used to leave our house to go buy music. What?
Right.
Yeah. So.
And we didn't have to pay licensing fees either.
Well,
we played it over and over as many times as we wanted.
And the things, this is what bothers me about getting old. This is the thing. I used to be a newspaper reporter. Newspapers are dying. I used to be a record store manager. There's no records anymore.
Right.
I was with the top wrestling magazine in the world. There's hardly any magazines anymore. Who thought that these things would become outdated or outmoded? It boggles my mind that people aren't relying on newspapers and magazines and the things that we always did for years and years and years. It's I guess you can't halt progress. Doesn't mean you got to like it.
No, and that's we used to get newspapers, my husband and I, but we finally gave up on that. It got too expensive, and so now we're
Yeah.
digitally reading. But you know what? I find out I don't read as much of the paper as I used to because I get tired of reading it online, and I want to be offline. I want to hold something in my hand, like a book.
Yes, and she holds her book up, folks. I will say this, and there's a reason for this. I always bought 2 daily newspapers every day, Monday through Friday, during my work career. Read them at lunch, read the sports news. To do that today would cost $475 here in New York for a year. I can't justify that,
No, I know it.
So we are changing, I think, because of the cost of print. Print is very expensive. And we're changing because, well, it's just more accessible on your phone or on a tablet or on your computer.
Yeah, they can turn around and put it out quicker, but you want something in the quality or in the
yes,
and they've laid off so many reporters, and
I almost got
the news we get is so much worse.
I almost got a job with an online thing. Right now, I learned to write like a professional writer, obviously, and I've won journalism awards. But now, when they want to hire you for the web, they want you to learn SEO writing, which hooks you. It's got keywords in it that make people want to Google
clickbait.
Clickbait. I'm not doing it. I'd rather quit. I'm serious. I didn't learn how to be a professional writer to end up being a salesman. It's not worth it to me.
I congratulate you on not bowing to that pressure.
I really did have an opportunity to do that and turned it down. I won't. It's not who I am. It's not what I learned to do. To me, that'd be a slap in the face of everybody who taught me how to write professionally.
Sure.
And it is a skill.
It is.
And I didn't have college for it. I learned on the job, fluking into this entire career I've had. So kind of like you with the photography and everything.
Photography, I learned,
But you and I are the perfect example of something. If you don't ask, you don't get. If
Right.
you don't ask, can I do this? You will never do that. It's important. If you have something that you enjoy, ask somebody, hey, can I help out? Can I be part of this? Like you must have asked, who was the first person you ever asked to, get better seats at the arenas? Or was there people that kind of helped you along the way in that regard? Like you wanted to take pictures and all that?
Yeah, because I was, believe it or not, they didn't have a ticket outlet. The ticket outlet was the kitchen of our promoter's home, and and they would the number that they would give to call for tickets was actually the promoter's I think they had a dual line. They probably had their own personal line, and then they had a ticket line on which was a hard line to their house, and so they would answer, and then I'd say, well, how can I get my ticket? And she'd, well, come, she'd give the address and I'd go pick up my ticket there. So because I like to have it ahead of time and I didn't want to trust the mail. So I'd go pick it up and pay for the ticket. And she'd hand me the ticket in a little manila envelope. And it was a hard ticket, and I did that over and over again. And so she got to know me, and I kept asking, like, how can I get better tickets? And because I invariably get second or third row, when I get ringside, and I try to get there as soon as I could, or call the number as soon as I could. Well, we have those reserved for our season ticket holders. Well, how do I do that? Because I knew I couldn't go for the whole year at that time when I first. Well, you have to wait till somebody till a spot opens up, and so. That was kind of how it went, but it was real low tech back then.
Yeah. Well, your story kind of reminds me of a guy named Terry Sullivan who went on to become a big time wrestling TV announcer for both the Sheik in Detroit and for Indianapolis. And he did it the same way you did. He just asked, could you use an announcer? I'd like to be a ring announcer.
Yeah. Yeah.
And eventually they said yes. It was just, that's it. That's the entire story. So if you can learn anything from us, folks, if you don't ask, you don't get.
Right.
A lot of it has to do with luck, but if you don't ask, you're never going to get.
Well, and being persistent. You may not get it the first time, but if you ask again, you might get it. Because I was able to shoot at ringside at some of the spot shows, and I learned my lessons as I went along on that. And as I got better at that, then when Peoria opened up for a photographer spot, I was in line to get it, and I had the experience by then. So uh, yeah, if I hadn't asked to be able to shoot at ringside during some of the littler shows,
Mm-hmm.
when you can't always start right at the top, you got to work
Right.
your way up sometimes.
Absolutely true.
So
Well, I'm glad you asked, because we would never have met all these years later. Joyce, it's been such a pleasure to talk to you. It's actually, it's thrilling to meet you, because it's like you're kind of an AWA expert. I don't care what strata you're at, even though you started as a fan, you know everything there is to know about that company. And this is a tremendous book, and I can't thank you enough. From one fan to another, this is the tonic. It
it's
makes me
been
feel
great
really
talking
good.
to you. I feel like we've known each other a long time, and
It's funny how,
obviously have a lot of shared experiences. So
yeah, we really do. It's
good to have a new contact and a new friend.
you got it. You got that for sure.
That's the
And
same
it's
value.
funny how wrestling does that.
Yeah.
See, and and I went to a convention in Philadelphia a few weeks ago, and it was the same thing. It's like people I haven't even met before. You talk to them for 5 minutes, you feel like you've known them for 10 years. It's something about this. It's the camaraderie. It's the going back to our youth, I
Right.
think, that just
We
kind of
share the
opens
same
people up.
experiences. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like when I have guests who are my old friends on the show, I feel like I'm 25 again. So it's like,
Yeah. It's funny because it's the way I felt writing this book. Is I felt like I was right back in it, and
exactly
sharing that same roller coaster again.
Mhm.
The highs and the lows. So it does take you back in and really bring you back to that time, which is a good thing. And yeah, there's enough bad news around, so I
Exactly.
felt like we need some good memories.
That's right. Folks, the name of the book, once again, is My Ringside Seat to the AWA. It's got a foreword by Sergeant Slaughter, and it's written, and the photography is by Joyce Paustian. Thank you so much, Joyce.
Thanks. Yeah, and look me up. I'd be happy to share memories or talk to anybody.
Again, the name of the book is My Ringside Seat to the AWA. Don't miss it. It's fantastic. I'd give it 6 stars if I could. That'll teach you, Meltzer. Oh, I shouldn't say things like that. Anyway, as I mentioned a few seconds ago, I want to mention 3 people who recently joined the Outdated Wrestling Hour fan club, which you can read about on our official website, which is outdatedwrestlinghour.buzzsprout.com. You can read about it. You can join up. You'll be able to take part in a Zoom meeting that we have going to schedule very soon, and hopefully do on a regular monthly basis. There'll be other perks and things like that. I'll do some prize giveaways or something like that, just randomly. We'll have some fun, and hopefully you'll enjoy. And you know what? You'll help keep the show going too, because things are going great. And I want to give a special thanks to these 3 people. First of all, I'm going to thank Anthony Perez. I hope I'm pronouncing your last name. I think it's Perez. Mr. Anthony Perez, a hilarious, wonderful guy, great friend. And thank you, Anthony, for joining up. We also have a bowling opponent of mine, Mr. Stan Kaplan, who has joined up. And I can't believe this one, Rick Del Santo, PWZ podcast, has joined my club. Unbelievable. Above and beyond the Call of Duty, all 3 of you guys. Thank you all so much. It means a lot. And I'll make it worth your while. I promise. Somehow, some way, I'll make it worth your while. Anyhow, I better do the usual housekeeping here. Again, if you want to get a hold of us, it's outdatedwrestling@gmail.com. Again, the website is outdatedwrestlinghour.buzzsprout.com. Twitter, Bob Smith NYC. Gmail, outdatedwrestling@gmail.com. Write to us anytime you like. I'm also at Facebook, just Bob Smith. You'll see me singing with BB King. Still proud of that. I'll never not be proud of that. I'll tell you that much. Anyhow, that's it for this week's show. Next week, Brian R. Solomon returns. Already, what a treat that's going to be for me personally. The preeminent wrestling writer today, and we're going to talk about not only wrestling, but his new book, Superheroes. Because you know what? That's doggone good too. So we're in a little bit of a literary mode for a couple of weeks, don't you know? And I hope you're here to enjoy and listen to all of it. We hope you had a good time today with Joyce Paustian. She's a fantastic photographer and a great person. And get out there and get her book. It's fantastic. So until next time, this is Bob Smith. After a lifetime in wrestling, I have one wish. Take care of yourselves. Will you?